Environmental Subcommittee. And before we get started, I will read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting we are holding is in compliance with the right to know law. As acting chairperson of this subcommittee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the Governor's Emergency Order 12 and pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that, one, we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and selected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously watch and or listen to the meeting on Zoom, YouTube, etc., and via phone by following the directions and links provided on the General Court website. Number two, we have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. Number three, we are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.nh.us or call 603-271-3043. Or in the event the public is unable to access the meeting, we will be adjourned and rescheduled. 5, please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. And finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anyone else is in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Senator Deitch, you join us. I'll start. It's Chris Bandazian. I'm at my office in Manchester with no one in the room. Michael, you're at the top of my screen. And
you're on mute.
Hi, this is Mike. I'm Mike Mumsat, present and alone at my home in Concord.
Joe, do you want to go next and say who you are and where you are?
Sure. Sorry, we're breaking up. This is Joe Ayotte. I'm at home in my home office, and I'm by myself.
Senator?
Oh, I think I should have joined as an audience member rather than one of the, perhaps Alan, you can downgrade me. I'm not a committee member. Thank you.
And other staff members present, Alan Raff and Eva Hawks.
Alone and in my living room in Manchester.
And Eva is present and muted.
Yeah, she's fine. She's good. Thank you.
All right. So in preparation for our annual report, do we need to deal with minutes first? The last minutes that I have are ones that Joe took for January 13th, 2020. I don't know if anybody has more recent ones, but I think that may have been our last meeting. Anyone have a recollection otherwise?
I think we just lost some. I'm going to resend the invitation there. Hold on a second.
That sounds right, Chris.
Okay. Joe, you and I are the only attendees right now who are present for that meeting. Other than that, it was Clark and Mindy. So maybe we ought to hold off on approving those minutes to get probably a quorum, get a majority anyway of the committee. So I guess moving on to our regular business, what I thought we might go through in preparation for our policy committee discussion was talking about 4 different areas. One are sources of Pfas contamination that we've identified and studied. One is how those sources of contamination migrate, if they migrate from the premises, remedial actions that are undertaken or ongoing, and then recommendations for further study as we go forward. So, before we get into that, Mike, do you have any updates? We met fairly recently as a whole commission.
Sure. As I think the members know, Senator Deach, the chair, had indicated that I could answer questions of the group regarding the decision last week on the Saint-Gobain variant, petition for variance. And I'm happy to do that to the extent I'm able. So basically on Thursday, Craig Wright, the director of the Air Resources Division for New Hampshire DES, issued his decision on Saint-Gobain's petition for a variance to extend the date that they were required under their permit to install the regenerative thermal oxidizer on their emissions at their Merrimack plant by 1 year. They sought, it's due to be installed by February of 2021, and they sought to extend that compliance period to February of 2022. And in his decision issued on Thursday, he indicated that the petition was denied. So they did not get that variance. They did not get the extension of the time period, and the permit in full effect requires that they complete construction of their thermal oxidizer by February of 2021. And there is a 30-day appeal period on that decision, which is running currently.
Mike, after assuming construction on time is completed in February, is there a commissioning period that has to go through before it becomes operational?
I don't know the details of what the startup looks like, to be honest with you. I'm just not sure about that.
All right. Well, I had identified a number of different potential sources, so I'll just go through those, and if anyone has anything to add, please speak up. But I think we've at various levels talked about all of these things. The industrial processes that are ongoing at Saint-Gobain, soils at the plant location, that's been somewhat mapped in 3 dimensions, surface water at the facility, groundwater at the facility, stormwater, wastewater, and then residue at the location, which would include the stack and air emissions, as well as the roof and drain system residues. Anyone have any sources of contamination to add to that? Well, if not, I just made a note to myself that prior to COVID throwing a monkey wrench in our scheduling, we were going to have Sarita Croce come to one of our meetings to speak with us. And I guess after November settles down, maybe I'll work on getting that done again. So we can hear what's happening at the wastewater treatment facility. Both what goes into the plant and what comes out of the plant. So moving on to migration, we've talked about stack emissions and how those are ongoing. There has been some work, Mike, on the stormwater system to improve leaks or?
Yes, they've done some work that's part of the site investigation, and that work is ongoing. There's still a lot of sort of unanswered questions about to what extent the any residues in the piping itself may be contributing, as far as, you know, from roof runoff and the roofing materials themselves, but also concerns about, which often happens with, you know, older stormwater management systems, is they may take in groundwater at various locations. And we know we have contaminated groundwater in the area. So that actually can contribute to sort of a fast track pathway for contaminated groundwater, which normally would flow through the formation and might well discharge to the river in that setting, depending on where it is, you know, hydrogeologically. But if it instead gets intercepted by a stormwater system that conveys it through a daylight pipe to the river, then you have a more, you know, direct pathway and a faster delivery, if you will, without the benefit of the formation, you know, mitigation of that. So I know that Saint-Gobain, I don't know all the details, but Saint-Gobain has done some work to sort of try to improve and ensure the integrity of the stormwater plumbing system so that it's less likely to be taking in groundwater discharge. I can get some more details from that from Jeff Martz, but that's about the extent that I know of it right now.
And then as far as surface water is concerned, I think we know that there are 2 unnamed tributaries on the property, and then Dumpling Brook farther on that discharge into the river.
Right. The one that's been most, you know, evaluated and studied is Dumpling Brook. And we do have we certainly have groundwater data as the shallow aquifer approaches Dumpling Brook, and we have surface water data in Dumpling Brook, as well as there was some, wasn't, because the sort of the landforms out there and the discharge point, the mouth of Dumpling Brook got changed a little bit by maybe a combination of beaver and flood and such. The fish that we sampled in that area, not convinced they were really indicative of you know, what we would see from Dumpling Brook, but we do have some fish tissue data from the mouth of Dumpling Brook.
All right. And just from generally looking at news, it looks like soils are being contained on site. They're not being, Saint-Gobain is not allowed to remove soil.
Right. We certainly, you know, any soils on the site that are contaminated, we would, you know, it's a little bit muddled in the sense that we can't say you absolutely can't remove soils from the site. They could remove soils and bring them to an appropriate facility. Would, you know, if they could find one that would accept them, but I don't think they have any activities or plans for doing so. There is a lot of construction, either ongoing or planned on adjacent parcels that are owned by others. And we have, you know, a prime example is the Flatley property to the south, where there was a significant construction project that has been developed since discovery of the site. There's been significant residential development there. And we spent a fair amount of time working with Flatley to try to make sure that they weren't removing soils from the site, or if they were, that they would have, you know, an appropriate facility to bring them to, that they wouldn't just be removing those soils and having them be unrestricted. Our view is that if you have soils that are contaminated that could pose a risk to groundwater in a new location, that those soils constitute solid waste. And so if you remove them from the site, you've got to find you're duty bound under the law to find a facility, a solid waste facility that could accept them. But it's a difficult area. And of course we have, you know, 60 plus square miles of contaminated aquifer here, and concentrations at some level of PFAS in soils in the whole study area. So making a decision waste has tremendous potential consequences, you can imagine. So we're still working to sort that out. And you know, a good example of that is DOT is evaluating that as they work on the highway construction project that transects that whole area.
All right. And I noticed that Mindy has joined us.
Yes, sorry about that.
Welcome. Could you just say who you are, where you are, and whether anyone's with you?
Yes, Mindy Mesmer. I am in Rye, New Hampshire, and no one is with me. I mean, people are in my house, but not in this area.
Okay, Mindy, we were just discussing how PFAS substances migrate from the Saint-Gobain site. So, and what we've looked at and talked about fish sampling. And Mike, I just wonder, I know there was a seasonal issue with that when sampling was done, big fish, little fish. I don't know if it was done a second time or if you know.
Yeah, I don't recall the details of what, obviously there's certain times a year where you try to see what we were trying to do was look at fish that likely spent a significant amount of their time in Dumpling Brook as opposed to in the main channel of the river. And because of what happened near the mouth, it became a little bit difficult to do that. That's, I mean, Dumpling Brook is kind of a unique stream. It's not by itself, but it's unique in southern New Hampshire in the sense that at its headwaters further upstream, it flows through historically have remained cool enough so that it can potentially support native brook trout. And we were really trying to see if we could see any of that in there, but when we did the sampling, that's not what we found. I'm afraid I'm a little muddled on the exact details now, but I can collect that for you if needed.
Okay. I wonder if anyone can update us on the Merrimack Village Water District treatment in those efforts.
I know that Merrimack Village District is moving ahead with its plans to impose treatment on a number of wells, but I confess I don't know the exact status of that at present.
Nor do I. Mindy or Joe, are you aware of the status now? Okay.
No, sorry.
And then as far as well testing is concerned, from looking at the One Stop site and Goldner Associates bi-weekly reports, it appears to me that that is being rolled out the way it was under discussion before there were any injunctions. So there's some testing going on. Some of it may be testing that just took months to coordinate.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy to say that, Saint-Gobain is largely, honoring they're completely honoring the standards that became effective in July. And they're comporting their sampling plan in accordance with that. And in fact, even when the injunction was on, they did. I think I answered this question a little bit tentatively because it wasn't sure during the meeting, but I've confirmed since that they did in fact provide bottled water to folks who had been tested and shown to be above the new lower standards. They provided that right away and then went back to do confirmatory sampling. And then of course they did suspend their sampling when the injunction happened, but they've since taken efforts to reinvigorate that, and they will be proceeding apace with sampling of folks inside the consent decree area that we are concerned may be above the new standards. The delay in that is related to a legal issue where they need to get the homeowners whose homes they sample to sign an access agreement. And obviously, anytime you ask someone to sign an agreement like that, it takes a little more time to make arrangements. Whereas normally, others do it. They just go in and say, "Can we sample?" And they say yes, and you go ahead and sample them. But this takes some prep time to get a written document issued to them and discussed with them and then executed. And then once that's done, they can go ahead and do their sampling. So they have a lot sort of queued up and ready to go, but not all that many completed yet because they're still waiting for that piece to get finished.
Mindy?
Okay, so can I ask another question again? I'm a little bit unclear. So the consent decree area, does that include the areas of Londonderry we had previously discussed, or is all of Londonderry outside of that?
No.
And then what's the process for expanding that area, the consent decree area? Because I'm hearing from a lot of people now in Londonderry with concerns.
Yep.
So I want to be able to inform them.
Sure, great question. So the blue line, as it's been called, that is circumscribes this larger area under the consent decree. The way that the consent decree is structured, any homes or wells inside the blue line, Saint-Gobain has a responsibility under the consent decree to honor whatever standard, duly promulgated standard, the state may set now or in the future. So, you know, when we went from 70 to 12 for PFOA, that basically became the, you know, the standard that they had to honor with respect to sampling. And if they found exceedances of that, they have to provide bottled water and make provisions for alternate water. The area outside the blue line, which is from outside the blue line to infinity, basically, they are still responsible to address any homes or wells that are above 70. But they have to basically do all the same things they do inside the blue line if it can be shown that they've impacted a well outside that area that's at a concentration above 70 parts per trillion. They are not required under the consent decree terms to address wells that are below 70. So, and that includes as to sampling as well. So unless, I mean, to the extent that we have reason to believe it could be impacted above 70, we can ask them to do that sampling. But largely the area outside the blue line, the agency is trying to conduct that sampling, and we have plans in place to do additional. We've already done a lot of sampling in Londonderry. But one of the problems we have here is that under the consent decree, if home is impacted below 70, but above the new lower standard, and we have reason to believe that that's as a result of Saint-Gobain's emissions, we're not in a position to require Saint-Gobain to provide alternate water to those homes.
So follow up then, how's that going to be fleshed out then? Because those people are drinking water above what the current state standard is, but they're not. So how is that going to be fleshed out, do you think?
Well, we're looking at that and trying to understand what the magnitude of that problem is and try to figure out what can be done to provide those folks with alternate water. But we don't have a solution for that at present.
The residents are aware, though, that is the case, that they're drinking water above the state standard?
Oh, well, certainly if they've been sampled, then they've been, you know, the communications with those people are exactly the same as they would be no matter where. I mean, if their water is above the standard, then they're provided with the notification of that and the same health-based guidance that we provide to anybody we sample.
So if they were sampled in the interim between last September and now, and they were above the standard, do we go back to them and notify them that their well tests now above the new standard, or what? Is there anybody like that?
I think that anyone that was during that time received notice that even though we basically, it was a hard letter to write, but even though that there was an injunction, we let them know that their water was above a health-based standard that we had set, but also let them know that that particular standard was not enforceable by the agency because of the injunction. So they were, I think, made fully aware of what the health implications might be at the time that they were sampled and that report was sent to them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So can we just go over now what the timeline is for Merrimack's appeal of the hydrogen fluoride scrubber? Is that a hearing in December, if I'm remembering correctly?
That's correct. There's a December hearing before the Air Resources Council. And, you know, something like that, it's hard to say. In some cases, those hearings may go multiple days, just because if it takes however long it might take to present the evidence. And then once that happens, the way our councils work, it's important for people to understand they are not part of the department. They are separate entities, and they have a dual role. They provide guidance and they consult with the directors of their respective divisions, in DES with regard to policy matters and long-range planning. That's one part of their responsibility. But the second and important part of their responsibility is to hear appeals of agency decisions. So the Air Resources Council hears all appeals of Air Resources Division decisions, which of course this, you know, so for example, I don't want to mix them because they're separate, but this recent variance decision that Director Craig Wright made, there's a 30-day appeal period that's running right now. If any party appeals during that 30-day appeal period, they'll be appealing to the Air Resources Council. And so similarly with the appeal of Merrimack, they appealed the agency's decision to issue the permit for the regenerative thermal oxidizer. And so that appeal is heard before the Air Resources Council. And it could run a few days, or, you know, I don't know, or it could be done in one day. It's hard to say. But and there's usually, it takes some time to do that because the councils typically meet once per month. They will sometimes, if they anticipate having a lengthy hearing, they'll actually, you know, schedule several consecutive days for that hearing. I'm not sure that they've done that in this case. So it's possible if it ran an extra day, it might go to the next month's regular meeting. And then there's a way that councils are structured. It's kind of complex in the sense that the counselors are the triers of fact, if you will. They get to hear the evidence and make a decision about what the facts are and what the truth of the facts might be. And then there is a hearing officer that is an attorney, an outside contract attorney who is appointed by the Department of Justice to serve with those councils. And in this case, most of them are done by a guy named Dave Conley. He's the hearings officer. He is, his job is to be sort of the trier of law. So if there are any issues of law that come up that are not fact-based, they're just purely issues of law, he is empowered to rule on those unilaterally without the council. He typically will seek their guidance and have a discussion, but he, under the law, he has the ability to rule on those issues. And then, so he runs the hearing, he's the hearing officer. And then once they've closed the hearing and taken all evidence and closing arguments, et cetera, the council then will often then schedule an additional meeting to deliberate. And then the hearing officer and the council members together will deliberate in public session and then make their decision. And then it's the job of the hearing officer to write up that decision and issue it. So as you can imagine, sometimes those things take several months to unfold. I can't anticipate what the pathway will be for this one, but I'm just telling you what I've seen happen with that council and other councils and that hearing officer.
So hypothetically, if the thermal oxidizer gets installed without a hydrogen fluoride, well, with or without, is there monitoring, or what is the monitoring of stack emissions at that point?
I confess, I'm gonna give you the best answer I can give you, but I have to tell you, this is not my area of expertise, and I have not followed this super closely. I do know that, or I'm aware that it isn't possible to necessarily monitor the emissions on this stack in real time. So it's not like there's a device up there that's connected to a data logger where you can get running of real-time data on what the PFAS emissions are from the device. So basically it's using technology as the standard. It's saying, based on what we understand, a regenerative thermal oxidizer will is the best available technology to basically control this to the maximum extent possible. And we have every reason to believe that it will be effective in achieving the reductions in the levels that we're hoping to achieve. So I don't think there will be a monitor. And just to go back to your previous question, because I didn't quite finish it now that I think about it. So once the Air Resources Council rules on this and the hearing officer issues a written decision, there's an opportunity to request a reconsideration. So the aggrieved party can make a motion for reconsideration. That can take another month or two or whatever it might take for the council to opine on that and issue its decision. And then assuming that the motion for reconsideration is denied, then the aggrieved party has the ability to appeal that the council's decision directly to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So it does not go to a superior court after that. It goes directly to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And then their decision would be unless there were federal constitutional issues, would be the last possible appeal for any party that was aggrieved. And that, of course, typically takes, well in excess of a year, because you've got to get your motions to the court and rule on whether they're going to accept it, and then they schedule oral arguments, and so that's many, many, many months. But that's the pathway that it can take. Not too many decisions go there, but it does happen.
So would there be any HF sampling that gets done, monitoring?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure about that.
All right. Oh, Mindy, I'm sorry.
Before we leave this topic, if you've exhausted all of your questions, Chris, I can ask another couple.
Go
if you don't
ahead.
mind. So the initial proposal had the HF scrubber, and then it was removed as a requirement for the final design. Can you just brief us on why that happened? And my recollection is because the standards didn't go into effect, the lower standards, but I don't recall. And just wondering where that leaves the variance, since the variance was not approved. Does that leave an opening now, since the standards then went into effect, for the state before the council meets or before the appeal happens to go back and revise the required HF scrubber back into the plan, since the standards now went back into effect? Or is there no option to do that right now?
So again, I'm going to preface my answer with the fact that I am not the expert on this, and I can go back and try to get a more finer point answer. But my understanding is HF scrubber was not required because there was no showing that the emissions that would result from use of the RTO by itself would be in a position to create a violation of the existing HF. We have HF standards. That's something that's been in place for a long time. My understanding is the Air Division found that RTO alone without an HF scrubber would not result in any violation of air emission standards for HF. So I don't think that the new standards coming into play here for drinking water for those 4 PFAS compounds would impact that decision. But that's just my understanding.
So I guess I am particularly interested in a final answer on this from someone. So if you could get back to us so we can put it in our report, I would be very interested to know that. Because I recall my conversations with the assistant commissioner about this. I think that was the way I understood it. I could be misinformed, but also the potential for other byproducts that we're not aware of, since there are 190 PFAS compounds coming out of those stacks every day, according to what EPA ORD said. That's a big concern of mine, is the plasmas and things that we may not know about that could be coming out of those stacks as a result of the thermal oxidizer still. So I just wanted to get clear on why that was removed from the original requirement, what the avenues are for putting it back into a requirement possibly, and how that fits in with the variance denial and the Merrimack Valley Water Commission MVD's appeal.
So just to make sure I've got that, why was the HF scrubber removed from the original proposal or the original plan
Permit, yeah.
permit? And then what are the avenues to put it back in? And then thirdly, how is that impacted by either variance denial or the pending appeal? Is that correct?
Right, and what was the reason for having it in and then taking it out too, the technical reasons before? I may be misinformed, but I think I recollect that it was concerns about the new lower levels.
Yeah, I'll find out. I'm not sure how they would be connected, but I'll see what I can learn.
All right. So in this COVID era, Mike, are there any ongoing or planned DES public information sessions?
I'm not aware of any right now. It doesn't mean there won't be, but I'm not aware of any that are scheduled at present.
I think Merrimack, Londonderry, Bedford are all pretty used to the problem now. Londonderry probably is more taken aback by this. So, and as far as extension of public drinking water, Litchfield's concluding project, and I'm not aware of any further ones at this point.
Right, that Litchfield water line is the last project to be completed. That was part of the, initial plans to address this. Now, the sampling that's going on now inside the consent decree area, is turning up, will turn up additional homes that need to have an alternate water source, depending on where they're located. That could just be as simple as connecting a home that's already got a water line in front of it, or it could be a requirement to design and install new water lines. But, not a great message for everybody, but if that happens, we're probably looking at, another 2-year period during which, have to identify what the scope of the project is, do a design, and then, the water company will need to go out to bid for or in collaboration with Saint-Gobain would need to go out to bid for a construction project to construct new mains and then do new service connections to homes.
Andy?
Yeah, so I apologize if I didn't catch the answer to this question. If there are residences outside of the blue area where the agency believes is a result of Saint-Gobain's emissions, how will that, I'm just trying to see, is there a trigger for another consent decree? How will that happen? What's the magnitude of evidence needed to push that into the need for an additional consent decree? Or is that something that's being talked about now? Or do you feel that that won't be necessary? Do you think there'll be compliance from Saint-Gobain without that? Or I'm more concerned about the people drinking the water above the current standards, lower than 70, that are not so quite within that blue area. So I'm just concerned about that enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, it's really hard to say at this point. I mean, at some level too, I mean, one of the confounding factors is that we do see, in Londonderry and other locations, exceedances that aren't necessarily easily tied to Saint-Gobain. In some cases, there are other potential sources. So sorting that out and sort of figuring that out is one piece. But then just argument's sake, assuming we have some cohort of homes that we believe are the result of emissions from the company, you know, under that consent decree, they're not bound to address that if it's below 70. So we're going to have to probably get another solution to that. Now, it's important to understand that the consent decree that the agency entered into with Saint-Gobain was between the state and Saint-Gobain. It did not in any way infringe on the rights of individuals to take action against Saint-Gobain. So theoretically, let's say 20 property owners in Londonderry felt they had a good argument that their wells were impacted between 12 and 70 with PFOA as a result of the company's emissions. They could take a unilateral action against the company seeking injunctive relief, which could include, you know, connecting them to water or what have you. It's important for people to understand that the agency wasn't, or the state was not acting on behalf of those individual homeowners when it entered into the consent decree.
Have we now talked through what remedial actions are ongoing or anything else ongoing that we have not discussed? Okay, then going forward, let's identify some things that we want to study or potentially propose for legislation. And I know monitoring what is happening with the hydrogen fluoride scrubber is one of our concerns. You know, certainly proceeding to have our discussion with Sarita Croce to understand wastewater inflow and outflow is one of the things we've been working on. And at our meeting of the commission as a whole, I had suggested, and I don't know how feasible it is, but extracting from new well testing data from those who have it done, what the PFAS results are. I don't know, Mike, if you know how accessible that data is or what percentage of people are actually having wells tested.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the latter part of your question got a little jittery for the connection, but I think what you asked was for the folks that Saint-Gobain is sampling now, is the data from that testing available? Is that right?
Actually, no. The DES recommends, you know, various things be tested and for all new wells, you know, from E. coli to arsenic and so forth. PFAS was added to that list. And so, you know, it's really a multi-part question, but do we know to what extent people who are having new wells drilled anywhere in the state are actually having PFAS test results? And if they are, is there some way that data can be mined?
Yeah, so that data would be collected and there's probably a way to get at it. I will tell you that, you know, we did a statewide drinking water quality survey that included something approaching 500 homes. And the results of that are not yet not all the sampling's been done, although most of it has been done. We got the COVID-19 got us a little bit jammed up on getting into some homes that had treatment where we needed to enter the home to do the sampling as opposed to doing it from an outside spigot and what have you. So it's a little delayed, but a lot of the data is in and a lot of the data is suggesting really that we don't see PFAS, maybe not even detected or detected at very low concentrations in most drinking water wells that we look at, particularly, you know, in the central and northern New Hampshire. Its prevalence is greater in southern New Hampshire, not surprising. But in general, we're finding we don't see it in most drinking water wells that don't, unless they're tied to some kind, you know, they're near a site or near a location that we think could be a potential source. typically either, one of three things, either a manufacturing facility that used the compounds, a fire training or firefighting site where PFAS foam was used, or some kind of commercial operation, not necessarily manufacturing, that might use like a car wash or something like that, that might use PFAS containing compounds and have a means of discharge of those compounds. That's where we tend to see the problems.
I think that's a really important point for the public to understand and know, because I think there was a lot of misconception about it's everywhere and polar bears and everything that really undermined a lot of the work you're doing to really understand and identify the sources for the contamination across the state.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, but the things people have to understand too is that just because it may, if you live in the North Country and your well's clean, it doesn't mean that you won't have PFAS in your blood, because you get all kinds of other sources like food and wrappers and various, consumer products that you might use or have used that contain PFAS. So it is true that it's in the environment, if you will. I mean, and even in soils. I mean, in Vermont, we're anxious to get underway with Mr. Ayotte here in the coming weeks to get started on soil sampling. But when Vermont did that sampling statewide, they found low concentrations of PFAS in soils virtually everywhere in the state. So it's ubiquitous in that sense, but it doesn't mean that it's ubiquitously impacting everyone's drinking water. And you're right, it's a really good distinction that's important to draw.
Mr. Bandazian, I was talking amongst ourselves with other commission members about the need to add someone from Londonderry potentially to the commission, now that we are aware that there's an issue and those people are unrepresented. So I think policy suggestion would be, a bill this fall to address that.
I had that thought as well. Okay, and I think in Bedford, we had a local government representative appointed, and that was me, as well as somebody else from the community. I think we probably ought to try to mirror whatever's been done before for members. All right. Any other recommendations we'll have going forward?
One question, I'm quickly trying to bring up the original bill. One of the things that sort of puzzled me at the time, and I'm trying to remember where it landed, was whether this commission was also intended to address communities impacted by the TCI site in Amherst, or was it specifically limited to St. Cobain?
I will have to go back to confirm, but I think it was specifically limited to St. Cobain.
Okay, all right. I think you're probably right, because, but if that weren't the case, then I think similar to what Mindy has suggested, that looking at Hollis and Nashua and Amherst might also be appropriate. But I think you're right. I think it was limited to St. Cobain.
I will take a look at that.
I don't think it was specific to a
Contamination source.
contamination source. I think it was specific to the setting of Merrimack, Bedford, and Litchfield. So I don't
Right.
think it restricted us from looking at TCI. And I think the assistant commissioner did bring that up a few times in terms of, letting us know about what's happening with respect to that. And I think that is also really important. And other sources of that, as you mentioned, Mike, will be important as we look at Londonderry, because there's an airport and a Superfund site there as well. So I think, sources of PFAS, the fact that the PFAS is contaminating the water, I think, is the issue, not necessarily the contributing source of it.
Right. So was Londonderry Londonderry was not mentioned in the original bill, was it? So that's what the bill would have to do. It would have to incorporate Londonderry into
Correct.
the mix.
Okay. Other things to address?
I know we've talked about this, but I can't remember the outcome. I apologize. Maybe Mike does, or maybe it's something to check on, but there's a lot of interest. Mike knows this as well, a lot of interest in the time varying concentrations of the compounds in groundwater. And I guess I would just want to make sure that that's, in terms of further action testing, I would want to make sure that that is, being addressed or really being addressed or, or something. I know DES has been working on it. I just don't remember the manner in which it's going. Do you have any recollection, Mike, or is that something to check on? Or
Do you mean retrospectively or looking forward?
looking forward in particular? I mean, just thinking about how, these compounds can persist and how they operate with respect to soil water partitioning compared to other contaminants. And it could be that they're measurable in important concentrations for a long time to come.
I think one of the things that, will happen, has not happened yet, but, typically as part of a site investigation and cleanup plan for any site, regardless of magnitude, monitoring, groundwater management permit and monitoring of groundwater through a representative set of monitoring wells is required. And that usually goes for many, many years for most sites. And so, unlike most sites where wells may be confined to a relatively small geographic area, we have talked for some time now with St. Gobain about the idea of identifying a number of wells throughout the region, throughout the impacted area, that could be set aside as monitoring wells for the long term to look to monitor this. And as part of that, one of the things we did was we originally considered, would we want to ask certain homeowners who were going to get connected to a public water system to keep their well and have it converted to a monitoring well, so that we would have access to that. And part of it was still learning a lot about the study area and the geology, not really sure where we want those wells to be. But as it turned out, a lot of people elected to keep their wells for things like lawn irrigation, that sort of thing. So there's quite a number of supply wells that will be available to us when that time comes to figure out what kind of a, and we may also end up going in and putting in overburden monitoring wells, traditionally just drilling them where we select them. But for bedrock, that in some cases they have their warts, but a supply well that we have at least some historic data on because we sampled them once or twice could then be converted to a monitoring well, and we could use it for those purposes. So I think there's definitely an eye towards doing that. I don't know that we're necessarily, probably just through the nature of the sampling and resampling we've been doing, we're going to have a pretty good record over this last 4 years of the study period. But moving forward, we're going to want to have something that's really kind of mapped out and someone looking at it with a technical eye to say what's a good, reasonably representative set network of monitoring wells that would help us understand trends over time.
So are you asking about, when you say time trends, are you talking about seasonal fluctuation, or are you thinking about also product replacement that then, because we went from legacy compounds to the supposed replacement compounds, and are you talking about that, or are you talking about seasonal variation caused by?
Well, I think usually with a groundwater monitoring plan, it's a little of both, because you want to typically, one of our typical groundwater monitoring plans, particularly in the early years of a site, will include triennial monitoring. So you try to look at April, July and November.
August.
And then sometimes for longer term, it might go to twice a year. So you're going to get some seasonal information as well, but also you're looking at long-term trends year over year as well. As far as the idea of looking at what happens moving forward as different products are replaced, My guess is that, it's tough because as sort of a research project, you can do that when you set out, this is going to be no doubt a very large monitoring network. And we will very likely, what often happens is you look at your target analytes and you figure out what, typical geochemical parameters that you want to collect every time, but then you usually try to hone in on your target analytes. But it's also possible that some subset of those wells could be looked at for a full suite. And that full suite gets bigger every day. I mean, what's typically available in commercial labs has gone from, 7 to 9 to 16 to 23 to, whatever the number is now. So there will be opportunities, even from a commercial lab setting, to get a significant number of additional analytes.
Thanks, that helps. I know this isn't the time, but the design considerations for that are near and dear to me, and including wells that are not contaminated currently, but as we know from MTBE, 10 years later can become contaminated over time. So looking forward to hearing more about that in the future.
So, Mike, is that a process that is just going to happen organically, or does it need some kind of proposed regulation?
Well, the requirement to do groundwater monitoring under a groundwater management permit is a well-established requirement in state law and rules. And so that will happen. I mean, admittedly, what that network and what that program looks like for Saint-Gobain will be larger in scope and different than anything we've ever done before. But no, I think the underlying authorities are there for us to require a robust monitoring program.
Okay. Anything else anyone would like to discuss about future recommendations? And if not, I'd like to give our audience members, if we have any, an opportunity to. Do we have any audience members?
We do. We have Senator Beach. We have somebody from the town of Londonderry and a Melissa Peterson.
Okay. So if any of them would like to pass along comments to us, give them a chance to do that.
Got a hand raised here. I'm letting them speak.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Lisa Drabeck, the Assistant Town Manager from the town of Londonderry.
Yes.
Hi, so thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to chime in to say I was encouraged and pleased by the recognition that Londonderry would like to be added to one of the affected communities for purposes of the study commission. Prior to COVID, I was able to attend one or two of your meetings, but then of course COVID hit and I know everything kind of came to a halt. So, I appreciate the opportunity. We have also spoken to a couple of our local state reps asking them to sponsor legislation to add Londonderry to have the same representation that the other communities do, whether it be a town official and a community member. But whatever we need to do in that regard, we're willing to do. So thank you very much.
Any other audience members that have comments?
If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Doesn't look like it right now.
Look like it. Okay. All right. Earlier on, we were discussing minutes of our last meeting that were recorded, and I believe that I haven't done a thorough search, but I think that might have been January 13th of 2020. That sounds right. Joe was our recording secretary for that. And if we can, I'd like to approve those minutes. At that meeting were Joe, myself, Mindy, and Clark Freese.
Just need a motion to approve and then you can vote on it.
I'll make the motion to approve.
I'm sorry, did we get those in email, those minutes?
I'm sure we did, but if you want to, it's a long time ago, and if we want to defer approval, we can certainly do that.
I guess I have not reviewed them, so I was trying to quickly look for them to see what I thought, but I'd prefer to defer if possible. Not that I want to slow things down, but I haven't had time to review them if they're on.
So what I think I'll do is I'll withdraw the motion, and if I could have my second to okay that.
Second.
Okay. All right. Unless there's any further business, I think we're concluded for today.
Just have to take a vote on adjourning officially too.
All right. So I'll take a motion to adjourn from somebody.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion by Mindy. Is there a second?
Second?
Second by Mike. All those in favor, we have to do this by roll call. Joe?
Aye.
Mindy?
Yes?
Michael?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. So it is unanimous and we are adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you, Al.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.